This is Zorina. Today we're going to be speaking about effective communication, trauma-informed communication, self-confidence. My guest is Nicolina Werther. She's been a guest a few times on Grownlearn, and I'm very warmly welcoming her to talk today to me, about trauma-informed communication, both in your work environment and in any environment, actually. Hi, Nicolina.
Hello. Thank you for having me back.
I'm very glad that you're back. It's been way too long.
Exactly. Let me just jump in because we were talking about, should we call it trauma-informed or not? Because sometimes this word I find can really put people off. And at the same time, sometimes I find it's a way to explain that. For me, it's a way of explaining like all these subconscious patterns you have and they get in your way of you doing what you want to do, but which of course very often link back to trauma or real trauma, or just experiences from the past, or you might have inherited, or something, which is why your body might have a reaction to something that someone else might find really easy. So in the case of communication, maybe someone else finds it really easy to speak up or to voice their opinion or to stand their ground, in an argument, and someone else is like, oh, I can't do that. The whole being is like closing down. And that's usually then, of course, a sign that something in their body just doesn't feel safe to be like, yeah, whatever, I'm safe here. I can argue back if I need to. So that's just to clarify, that's my understanding of trauma.
Great that you clarified it, because I'm also a bit weary of the word trauma. I don't like it very much because it puts people in a defensive position, like, oh, I'm not traumatized. And the fact is, we're talking about, and your expertise is on the nervous system, how to regulate it in order to come out as a confident speaker, as express yourself confidently, have an internal talk also confidently. Let's start with the internal talk, because I find this the basis for any communication.
It is, and it's, in a way, it's the same thing, isn't it? Like, no matter if you want to do something on your own, or if you're in an interaction, or whatever it is, if internally something is not feeling great about that, then you will not be able to do it as well or as graciously, or whatever you want to call it, as you could. And of course, for some people, they will notice it as in self-talk, as in, the inner critic comes up, and it's like, oh, you're not good enough, or you can't do this, and how dare you, and like what? Or it might literally come up in, this feels horrible, or like practically, like your heart rate's going up, you're breathing faster, or you start sweating, or like there could be many different ways depending on the person, how someone perceives it. And yeah, right, like I'm always like, should I say trauma or not? But in a way, of course, like the knowledge we're having, and it's getting more, I find, in society right now, is coming from trauma and trauma healing. That's when people start to realize, okay, it is when something gets so stuck in the body and in the nervous system that it's repeating, like it just can't stay, it can't switch to a different state because it still perceives something as a threat. And yet it might not necessarily be trauma, as in what some people think about when they hear the word, which is often physical or sexual trauma or something. It can be, very different things, from having a very critical parent, and as a kid you went like, can't do anything wrong here. That's still trauma to a kid, right? And like I said, it can even be something inherited. So maybe your grandparents had to flee from a war-torn country or something, and so they have this like extreme anxiety in their bodies, as in like, it's not safe, like I'm not safe here, and or maybe there was poverty or something, and if that's never been released, like you might still have something in your body which is constantly telling you, like, we have to protect ourselves, so we like it's not enough and something, and that's still trauma, even though if you might have consciously never experienced something in your own life.
Yeah, actually, there's some new research that I don't know if it's research, but let's call it research for the sake of it, because I don't really know. Okay, it's not. I don't have the official numbers, because when I say research, people always say, show me where's the research. I can't tell you where the research is, but there's a new field of study that actually says trauma can be inherited down from I don't know, 6 generations back, because it's given via the morphological fields. So even if you haven't spoken to your parents that were, let's say, to your grandparents that were in the Second World War, you could still be inheriting whatever trauma they could have borne in your body. And so I would like to also talk about ways to overcome this and to remove it, because I know that there's some techniques to bodily release this trauma directly from the body. And I know you're using different types of techniques, more like, what are you using actually to?
It's true for that, because I was trained as an embodiment coach. Really, that's usually what I use. I mean, amongst other things, because I find it so effective. And the way I've been trained was also by someone who's quite spiritual in a way. So we usually do it in a more like a meditative state, which I guess is similar how you work. And I know there are lots of different techniques, but generally, at the moment, I think generally the opinion in the scientific community or generally out there is that if you need to work with the body, because it's cellular memory, isn't it? It's not like you cannot just access it with your mind, even though, having said that, you can get quite far, even just with something like cognitive behavior therapy or something. But mathematics is just so beautiful, and it's so easy. And that's why I meant, like, for me, I didn't realize it at first, because obviously I also have a background in change your mindset and work, what's going on in your mind, what's your thoughts and all this or that. And then at some point I realized, after I've done more embodiment work, that I don't really listen. Like, I don't even know if there's still anything going on, because I just immediately always go to how's my body feeling in the moment. And it's so much more immediate, because I know if my body is going like, oh, or if my body's like, yeah, fine. Nothing to worry about. That's kind of all you ever need, is to just be so familiar with a state of ease and relaxation and comfort in your body that you will immediately notice if something is kind of making you close down. That's all you need to pay attention to. It's much faster than trying to catch all my thoughts or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, talking about this approach of trauma healing, I have personally not experienced anything with the body like what you're practicing, but recently I came to learn about timeline therapy by Ted James, and this has worked really well. I did it on myself. I tested it with a few clients, and they actually said it works much better than the Silvo methods which they had tried before, and it's like it has an immediate effect, and I experienced it myself. And this method actually gets you to get rid of the big five fears and the big 5 limiting beliefs, and they go in order, because very interestingly, when you get rid of one fear, it can trickle down in the one following it. So the neurology, the mind is linked in such a way that if you don't clear all of them, all of these big 5, it triggers. For example, the first fear that you need to get rid of is anger. If you clear anger, and the next one down the line is fear, but if you don't clear fear, you're going to start feeling fearful. So they all have to be done. You have to clear the big 5 negative emotions in one day or in one session. Otherwise, they go down the line. And so they're anger, fear, sadness, injury, pain, and guilt and shame. So, so eventually, if you don't clear any of these, they will go to guilt and shame.
That makes sense. Because I'm just thinking, I don't work like that, but if I'm thinking, I think from Esther Hicks was the first one, like Abraham Hicks. I think she has a list of emotions. You find it in a few modalities where they kind of list them in like how high the frequency is supposed to be. It ends with peace and love, and it usually shame is at the very bottom, because shame is just the most densest and lowest vibration. It's complete shutdown in a way. So without knowing much about that modality, for me, just hearing it makes perfect sense. Anger is very alive. It's almost in the middle. Sadness is already lower. And, despair is lower. And you said pain is, for me, not an emotion, but
pain,
possibly
injury.
fits in. Yeah, possibly fits in there. And then, makes perfect sense that you say, shame is usually.
Interesting.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, our conversation took a different direction, but let's go back now to communication, to confident self-talk. What are some ways and approaches that we can use apart from clearly trauma healing and the embodiment techniques that you have, something that people can easily do with their mind. Can you give some suggestions on how to confidently self-talk, what to observe?
I mean, the way I understand communication, it's maybe we should have some examples, because otherwise it stays a bit. Maybe do you have any? Maybe we can unpack something. I also
yes. We actually briefly touched on this. Let's talk about a very tricky example. When somebody tells you, I feel my body feels repulsed by this person, I cannot deal with them. What is the how do you deal with this situation? Do you tell them, okay, you're right, your body tells you the truth, or is there something behind that we might question?
I personally didn't have that example, like no one ever, but I know I've seen it online a lot that people seem to have that as a thing. And I think actually you said it yourself, like you question that first of all. Like I mean, my belief system is generally that there's not that much bad in the world. I mean, there is, of course, but I don't know. That's just my way. I just like to question things. Like, is that really true?
Mm-hmm.
And to get curious about why. Like, why is your body like what? Stay with it. I think the way I would do it is again, like same as everything. Stay with it. Stay with that feeling, like that sensation, that impulse, that something that is like, ooh, I don't like that person. And see, like, because I work with the body, I would literally make sure you fully have you really know that in your body.
That you don't shove it under the rug, which is what people do with emotions. Yeah,
exactly. But you get really, really familiar with it. Let it be there, and then get curious if there's any information in it. And usually, it will tell you something. And in that example, I mean, I'm not sure if I'm fully answering your question, but it possibly would be something like they remind me of someone, or I really like this thing about them. Reminds me of that awful experience I had, or that other awful person I met and they hurt me. And there's possibly something in there why your body is automatically like, no, not that. Right? Yeah. I mean, let me know how you would approach it.
Same way, question, well, what in you tells you that, or tells your body to react in this way? What is it in you that commands your body to react with repulsion? And then you start going deep and questioning. So again, you have to stay with the feeling, as you say. It's a similar approach, just a different question. But yes, you approach it with questioning.
And it's I mean, I was thinking, was I writing something yesterday? I was thinking, it sounds like such a cliche, but in a way it's love, isn't it? Like if you can bring curiosity and respect to something, that's very close to love. It's not yet love, but we get there. And just that, this openness, curiosity, and non-judgment, like it sounds very basic in a way. It's like what they teach you in all the great wisdom traditions, right? Non-judgmental, just be curious. But it's kind of that. And just stay with that and see what unfolds. Like, just don't shut it down. And there might be a good reason why you don't want to interact with a person, but there might also not be. And I mean, from personal experience, I find that happens a lot, that maybe not now anymore, but in the beginning that there's a particular type of person or something about their style or the way they speak, and we just shut them out because we think, we have a memory or something, and we're like, oh, not them. And we haven't given them the benefit of the doubt that maybe this particular person, even though they dress funny or talk funny, might actually be a really awesome person.
Yeah.
So that's definitely.
Yeah, I think somebody even wrote a book, Labeling, which goes very close along these lines of dismissing people just because you have an automated created label. I mean, no matter how much we're trying not to judge, there's such a strong internal system to rank people and to put them in boxes and to judge them. It's a point of survival. So it's internal labeling.
Yeah.
And I find this also very interesting, how you can start noticing the labeling you're doing yourself.
Yeah. And you're right. It was a part of survival, right? Because we had to be in our tribe, and anyone who didn't look like the tribe, and was ape or like chimpanzees. I think the tribe, we used to be 150 people. or still is for them, you had to be really careful because you didn't know who they were, and maybe they have some weird diseases that your body can't cope with. And so yeah, if you go back a few tens of thousands of years, then it makes sense. Why? But these days, of course, that doesn't make sense anymore. Usually. Yeah, well, let's think of something else, because I know we also thought about intuition, and I'm curious about at what point for you, when is it intuition and when is it just questioning your own beliefs almost, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm also, yeah, go on.
No, I was just going to mention that I recently launched my, it's not a course, it's actually a training mentorship program for businesses called Business Intuition. And I use some methods from the Silver method and another one from a governmental agency to plug in your intuition. You activate your right and your left hemisphere of the mind, and you start perceiving more. So people understand intuition in different terms. Some think it's based on experience, and it's just awareness based on experience. You're much faster receiving this information. But very often, and it's actually being tested that it's not that. It's been tested this time for real with electrodes on the right and the left hemisphere of the mind. And the people who were able to make decision from the activation of both hemispheres were actually much more effective. This was done in the 70s. There were 12, Jose Silva and his team tested 10 groups of 12 CEOs. I know it's long ago, but it's still valid. Tests were done much, I mean, for a while they weren't done actually on measuring my brain activity and consciousness, because you activate the perception of consciousness with the brain activity. But the results were that the CEOs who managed to double their revenues in the previous 5 years had active naturally both the right and the left hemisphere of the mind. And the CEOs who only thought with their logical mind, it was primarily active when questioned, they had actually either kept the level stable or had gone through losses, had taken the companies through losses. So there is such a close correlation between business success and the natural ability of the leader to think in a centered way. It's unbelievable. It's undeniable. These are 60 people, 60 CEOs tested in this way with ECGs, the ones that measure the brain waves, they stick to your mind.
Yeah. And like before you even mentioned that example, I was thinking business decisions, because personal decisions, yeah, you might use your intuition, but I find personally business decisions so interesting, because they are kind of, it usually affects more, right, than just 1, 2, 3 other people. Do you have any examples where like intuition was used and it, like they went for this instead of just that or something? I mean, think maybe I have something as well.
I mean, I can personally tell you how I've used because I used to use the Silver method back in my corporate career, even before I started training people on such techniques. And I have used it for the creation of business models. So you're throwing me back like 10 years ago, but I remember I had a business model that involved telecommunication products and offset options for the phones. So this was implemented a bit in a different way than I had the concept for, but it was taken on. And then another business model had to do with the installation of PV panels on the building, and this was also done, but at a different building. But anyhow, these were all taken, and I've used it in my work to make decisions on, let's say, I'm given the task to think on a certain subject. I go to a certain level using my logical mind, and then I plug in this intuitive ability to know how to navigate further. So this is how it's used. You don't use it primarily based on woo-woo and hunches. You're given a concrete task, you develop it logically to a certain moment, or you look at all the possible logical outcomes, you feed your mind first with logical information, and then you let your increased capacity of the mind perceive and kind of mold together this information to give you the most appropriate action. This is how it works. So it has nothing to do with, let me just perceive some random channeled information, although it may be correct as well, but there is a process that you go through.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense to me. It's I mean, that's even without a manual for it. I think that's how I would use it. It's like exactly like you say, you get to a certain level and then you're like, okay, let's open up to some more information. Oh, actually.
Exactly. Yes. It's a straightforward process. There's nothing miraculous about it once you understand how your mind works.
Absolutely. And I just find it interesting because intuition often evokes this idea of, like you said, it's like not real and it's all airy-fairy. It's actually not. You just use different levels of awareness. And for me, that's exactly the same. I would teach it in communication as well, is that's, I don't know if I mentioned that before, but you have all these strategies of, you greet someone like this, or ask them about that, or remember that detail about them, and blah, blah, blah. How you build good relationships, maybe at work or communities or whatever. But is there such an easier way if you obviously are confident within yourself, so self-regulated as in nervous system regulation, so you're not freaking out. But once you're there, you can talk to someone, and instead of just focusing on details and using your rational minds to remember things, you can just open up and perceive everything about this person, and you get so much more information about this person, or what might be important to them, or how you want to relate to them. It's so much, for me, it feels so much more easy and natural to build a good relationship, and to, which then of course leads to good communication, and maybe, like I say, I of course sometimes use it to get you to the places in life and business where you want to be, which starts with relationships and communication. And if you do it in that way, which I also sometimes I use the word tuning to someone, for me, it's much more than just what they say or how they look. But you can only perceive it if you use all of your awareness. You don't perceive it if you are super focused on, but they said it's this thing and they must mean that. So it's like, no, you completely missed something that was in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. If I may give a personal example also from the Grownlearn podcast, whenever I interview people, of course, there is the first look judgment. It's unavoidable. But what I do next is like, I tune myself up with interest, with curiosity, exactly what you mentioned. I'm very curious now what they have to say. Yes, maybe I've labeled them initially in the first few seconds, but despite of that, be it negative or positive, I'm very curious of what they have to say. And I delve in the conversation with a very open mind. And this is how I think based on the feedback of the people that I've interviewed, they appreciate it very much. Because this is how I'm able to also come up with questions that are relevant for them and for the audience. It's not just automated, okay, let's see what they might like. It's actually coming from real deep curiosity. I want to know you.
It's deep listening. And to be honest, I know I like to work with people who also have businesses or projects or something. Often it's that context. But I think when I first thought about why is communication coming up, it was actually people who mentioned to me they wanted to improve their communication with their kids. And I don't have children, so I was thinking, why is this coming up? I do have a nephew and a niece right now, and they're raised by a mother who's, I think, she's a psychologist, but really aware of these things. And so I kept watching, like, what's going on and whatever. And in the end, it became clear to me it's the same kind of thing. If you want to really communicate with your child, you need to look beyond the most obvious, right? You have to perceive them to the point that you understand if they're having a tantrum or a fit, what they really need is not being scolded or told how to do things differently. They are actually craving your attention. They just felt like they weren't getting like the kind of attention they needed or something. But you see that when you use more of you to understand them, like as a human being, like with the basic human needs that we have. And in children, it can be so pure because it's in a way quite simple often how they, they start making stupid things when they want your attention or something, or and so I was like, that's kind of how I started to get more curious about communication in all different areas. Still like to talk about that.
Yeah, no, it's great what you're saying, and it also takes me to the beginning of our conversation before we started recording, when you said I'm trying to be easy on myself, and this is the first thing that clicked in my mind now that you talked about observing your child, because I personally have a child, and I'm trying to be observant and to also understand what's going on behind, but at times it happens that you just cannot, and it's also happened in a business environment. You just want to deal with it and you don't want to go into the emotions and you just want to get it over with somehow. And it happens in all kinds of environments. So how can you be easy on yourself then and say, okay, I make mistakes, it happens. Well, what do? You just say, I make mistakes, or is there something else?
Yeah, you're human after all. No, you are. Of course you are. So I do have, well, let me start with the one about children first. I've once heard, because I did a whole training on somatic attachment trauma therapy, which I thought for me also was really interesting to see through the lens of attachment, which for me is kind of key to most things.
Did you say the lens of detachment or attachment? I didn't.
Attachment as an attachment theory. Yeah. And I remember, I think it was actually Gabor Mate who said that who was not on that course, but that as long as you manage to attune or like have a connection with someone, like I think he was talking about children, one out of 3 times, it's enough to make sure they're securely attached. Uh-huh. So as a parent, you don't have to worry if one time it didn't work out or another time it didn't work out, because like you said, it's normal, right? You cannot always get everything right, or you don't have the time or whatever. But as long as it's like a third of the time, that's still enough to have a healthy relationship. And that goes, of course, for relationships in all areas of life. And in a way, that's the same. And
that's such a relief. That's such a relief, Nicolina.
Because the worst thing you can do as a parent, and like I said, I keep using these examples, even though and that means it's exactly the same in other contexts.
Yeah.
Is if you get stressed that you're not doing right or that you're not doing enough or whatever, you're doing worse for your kid because you're stressed. Yeah. Then if you're like, hey, come on, I'm just human, I make mistakes too. Because they get that we all make mistakes, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're being stressed, that's much more difficult, because then you're less able to attune in the next, like then you're stressed and you don't have the resources to be present in the next situation. Mm-hmm. And I would argue, without having given it much thought before, it's the same in business. You can't do everything. You have to make mistakes. Some things just don't go wrong. I mean, or the same as in investing or whatever, right? But then, as long as you get it right, I don't have a number for this, but let's stick to the 1 out of 3 rule. I think that's a nice rule. Overall, you still get there, right?
Right, that's right. And you're approximately right, but it's even lower in investment, as far as I know.
Possibly, yeah. I don't have any numbers, but it's like that's where often you have to play the long game. If you only look at a week or something, might all go to hell. But if you look at 10 years, same like business, investing, children, whatever we want to talk about, then you possibly see that as actually working out.
Yeah.
And
that was really great, a real relief actually to think about it, that because it also puts you in the corridor of perfection. If you're always observant about everything you do, everything you say, your internal talk constantly. I mean, of course you have to be observant, but if you're like super focused on that, you become a perfectionist and you repel everybody around you.
Absolutely. And of course you do try to do your best, but you don't obsess about it. And the worst I find is like, I used to be very interested in nutrition and stuff, but I'm still trying to be healthy. I think I'm quite healthy, but I find it quite, should I say, sad, how often people get so into what's right and what's wrong and what you should do, or what they cause more stress than if they would just eat the sugar for once, or drink the coffee or whatever their thing is that you shouldn't do, which is all usually valid and there's all good reason for it. But stressing about it is worse for sure.
That's right. And I've gotten actually a lot of questions like, should I meditate every morning, every evening? No, you shouldn't actually. You shouldn't, because this creates so much stress. You should do it whenever you feel like it. And I'm not going to go into detail, it's a different conversation, but there's a process when you train your mind, when you have to be regular, but afterwards, you're not a robot, and if you miss one time because life happens, or if you miss 10 times, big deal. You pick it up from wherever you left it when you can.
And that to kind of come back full circle for me because I look through that lens, comes almost back to nervous system regulation. Because if you're not getting fully like wired up, like, oh, I made a mistake, or now everything's going to go to pieces and I completely messed up and I'm a failure. If you go down that spiral, it's very difficult to get back after 10 times failing. But if you're just like, yeah, fine, what happens, and you stay, we always say we want to stay calm, even though you don't want to be calm because you still want to get angry and stuff. But if you can just like, the whole point about nervous system regulations, of course, you can come back to your equilibrium. And if you do that fast, you're like, fine, I've failed 10 times, so what? Might still work out the 11th, right? Mm-hmm. And you don't get this whole emotional, like, ooh, this is horrible. Like, and so you're like, yeah.
I'm going to give you a very practical example again with my child, because it kind of fits this conversation. It's with missing things and not being perfect all the time. So he goes to basketball classes, but he missed, I think, about 2 months. He was sick for a bit and then he didn't want to go. He simply said, I don't want to go to basketball. So fine, I can't force him, right? He doesn't want to go. And so eventually he said, okay, I will try to go. And he felt quite, how should I say, maybe pressured by how he would be perceived after missing for so long. But in the end, it turned out to be much easier. Like one child asked him, oh, where were you so long? And that was it. So he kind of fit in very fast. And it is the same way we can pick ourselves up after being on the loose end for a while, I think. It's like we tend to see we've done something very wrong, and it's going to take us a lot of effort to come back to speed again, to where we left it. I mean, and this applies to everything, let alone, attending basketball, yoga, whatever you're doing, or a diet or whatever. It applies to everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's the whole thing, right? If you make it mean anything about yourself, you make it mean anything, but that's not the truth.
Yes. Right.
And there's a lot of, which of course doesn't mean we want to, go all overboard, but it's a fine, it's not a fine line. It's more, I find it's mastery almost. It's a skill to be like, in the end, we're talking about a lifetime here. So as long as you know where you want to go, and I think it's very important to have visions and, have stuff you want to make happen, but then like go by that. Like if that's still the same after 2 months of not doing something, go back to it and don't make it mean anything that you just didn't do something for 2 months. That's much worse, because then you struggle much more to do it again. And I think also your intuition will help you with that, because if your rational mind might get a bit like, I'm not sure, but if you then just like ask a bit more higher guidance, or just more guidance, so to speak, I would argue you possibly get the answer that tells you, you know what, just do it again.
Mm-hmm. But when we talk about intuition, nervous system, this and that, practices, mindset, we tend to separate them, and in the end, it's all the same thing. It's being aware, it's being conscious. I know this word is overused. Conscious, being aware. What does it actually mean? It means to contemplate, to meditate, to understand. Just go within and ask yourself a few questions, and that's all about it. You don't. Of course, techniques help. When you go into depth in these methodologies, it helps to understand what's going on faster. But as a matter of fact, you can pick yourself up from any situation just by stopping for a second and, contemplating what's actually going on.
Yeah.
At peace, without the tension. What is actually going on? Mm-hmm.
Now, for me, the peace is a nervous system regulation, as I was saying. That's the ability to not stay on a high spike or whatever, but being like, oh, okay, so what's going on?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. And then you might just arouse your nervous system again because you want to do something. But is that that's for me what the flexibility is like? Okay, you have this moment. And that's what you can only do that if there's not hurt, or we call it trauma at the beginning, or whatever, stuck in your system, because that's the thing that stops it from being possible, because your nervous system is constantly on. It's like there's constantly danger. But once you have that out of your nervous system, life gets so easy. Seriously, I fly.
I can tell by your peaceful demeanor.
Yeah, because you're not constantly having to, have an emotional reaction or like energy. You don't need so much energy for things.
I enjoyed this conversation very much, Nicolina. Before we go, where can people find you? I know you have a course on offer at the moment.
Not yet. If you post it soon, it's not yet there, but I will share it.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a new free resource. I called it. I think we had before that. It was a thing about being shy at work, but now I called it become magnetic, because for me that's kind of the key bit if you want success in life, and whatever that means. But influencing situations, influencing people from a really holistic place, as in being able to tune to us, like all the things we talked about, basically. So if you want, we can link that, which is kind of it's going to lead into the course about communication, but that's going to happen later in the year. So, and other than that, I would say.
So this is a free PDF resource that people
exactly.
can.
Yeah, that's free, and that also has my details in it. And other than that, I'm mostly on Instagram or social media, and then usually you'll find it on those pages as well. But yeah. So I think that makes, I would say if someone's using Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever, or get that resource, and then it also tells you how to find me if you need me.
So on all these social media, you use your name, or is there a different?
No, I do always. I think it's literally all of them are Nicolina Werther.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Werther is spelled WERTHER.
Yeah. So it's very easy, but it's just I'm just not as active on all of them. But it's usually you see that when my last post was. And info@nicolinawerther.com is my email. So all very straightforward.
Great. Cool. I very much enjoyed it as always. I like the free-flowing conversations we both have, and we always touch on so many topics.
We do. Yeah, so always very, very nice forwards and backwards stimulation.
Yeah. All right. I'd be glad to have you back again, and when you're ready to announce your upcoming course. And in the meantime, I'll put the link below to the free PDF resource.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I might give you, I'm just thinking, you might even, I have another one on nervous system regulation. They're similar, but a little bit different. Mm-hmm. So you can have both if you want, because we talked so much about the nervous system, but there's a bit in the other one, and the become magnetic one as well. But it's just a bit of it, and the other one is just that.
All right. Well, whatever you decide, I'll link it below. And everyone, if you have any comments or examples to share or opinions about this conversation, I'd be glad to read them and respond. Thank you very much.
Thank you.